Know exactly when it is.
Welcome back, everyone, to Morning Line. Happy to have with us former First Lady Andrea Conte, also the founder of You Have the Power, talking about a big event that's coming up tomorrow night at Centennial Park to honor children who have died at the hands of violence here in Davidson County. 23 children in the past year have died in that way and will be remembered tomorrow during that ceremony in Centennial Park, 5 o'clock there in Centennial Park. And it's in that beautiful garden. You may have seen it if you've been to Centennial Park. But this is the first time you've had a ceremony like this. Is that right?
That's right. I just have to correct one thing. It's 23 children from 2017 and 2018. Okay. These are the most recent children who have died from violence. This is the first time that we have done a book, they're actually little bios of each of the children called Voices from the Garden, because we thought it was important to identify just who this child was, because most of these kids never got a chance to be in a yearbook. So to have their photos and to have remembrances from the family about this child is very special.
And when you say remembrances, what do you mean? Are you talking about, I guess, toddler pictures and that kind of thing, or what should we expect with that?
There are photos, and remembrances of the family can be everything from what they thought about the school, what they did in their leisure time, what some of their characteristics. So it is very individual to the child.
And what has made you so passionate about this? We talked earlier about how you founded You Have the Power, but what has made you so passionate about this thing out there at Centennial Park and this whole what's happening out there?
Well, there were several founders, and I was there at the founding of this garden. And I've been to, I don't know, dozens of ceremonies out there through the years. But when I began looking at the garden specifically, I went over one day, and there are some stones that the children's names are carved in, and I wanted to get an inventory of those stones. I wanted to know the children who were on each one. And as I did that, I realized how few of these kids I really knew. And at that time there were 206 names. And that struck me. I thought, here I am involved in this, and I know so few of who these children are. And I wanted to answer the question, who was this child? Because I think that's part of why people in Nashville, so many people don't know about the garden and what it is and what it represents. And in a sense, by telling these stories, we bring these children back to life.
Do you think it also helps? I mean, someone asked, why are we seeing this kind of violence and that kind of thing? And we don't, there's no maybe one answer. But is this a way to help prevent future deaths if we don't just move on so quickly from these past tragedies, or not? What do you think about that?
I do think we have to take it to the next step and the next step after that. Because after talking about who is this child, we do have to get to the question of what happened. But that has to be very careful and methodical, because if we look at that, if we can look at that kind of information, there might be points of intervention that could be done, or maybe could have been done differently, that might have changed that outcome. There just could be, there's information there that would help guide us to the next question of what can we do.
I like that, points of intervention. Maybe there was something. What can we learn from this case or that case that could help prevent a future case? And there are things. You feel like there are things, right?
Well, you know, I think that there's going to be a lot of information that could come out of that, because I do feel there are points of intervention, and were they missed, or what happened, or maybe not recognized? I mean, for example, if there's a very young teenage mom, would it make sense to have that mom be visited by a visiting nurse over and scheduled interviews with her at home, just to help answer questions, and also give that person, that young mom, someone to call when she has a question?
That's a great point. Yeah, how you know she's overwhelmed. Is there some way that just one visit on a semi-regular basis could make a difference?
I think that it certainly could, because there's a lot of information that could be exchanged, questions that are asked that could be answered, resources that could be made available.
And as you look at the lives of each one of these children and the tragic end, is there a common denominator? I mean, that's interesting you throw out the young single mom. I would imagine it cuts across all kinds of socioeconomic, all kinds of backgrounds. But are there some common denominators, or is it fascinating in that there aren't many? The in-depth work we've done has been on these 23 children, and while that's only 10% of the total children who are remembered in that garden, so it's still a small sample. But one of the things that that really is apparent is gunshot deaths are very prominent. But although the causes of the deaths of each of these children ranges from abuse, neglect, arson, to gunshot, but you can really see that that's something we need to address. That's interesting. So that is certainly something you're seeing across many of these cases.
Yes.
Guns were involved.
Guns are involved.
And I think if you watch the news, you're not shocked to hear that. But again, with the news, what you get sort of just a quick sort of tragedy happened last night, and then you move on. You barely have time to even learn the name. And that's why I think this is so valuable, because you're going to really get a better sense of who that person was. And not just in one ceremony, but with this book you're presenting, it'll be there for a long time to come. And so I'm sure you've reached out to the parents. How many do you think are going to be there, and kind of what are you expecting as far as that's concerned?
We expect to have a really wonderful turnout from the parents. We found, I think that we have 15 or 16 now who are committed families. So we're looking forward to presenting them that book.
And how is it going to go? What will happen? How many people will speak? You know, kind of walk us through what's going to happen. It's at 5 o'clock tomorrow, but what's going to happen?
It'll be a very efficient ceremony, because it's Friday night, and people do want to move on to other things. But the mayor, we expect the mayor to be there. The mayor will speak. We will have a presentation for the families. Mm-hmm. We'll have some in our audience. We'll have some ministers, and I have to say, I just want to compliment our congregations in Nashville, because there were costs to printing this book, and we went to some of the congregations and asked them for $234, because that's the number of children who are remembered in the garden. And these congregations, I mean, most of them are not wealthy. They did so much. They made contributions at whatever level they could, sometimes more than $234. And we've had congregations just across the spectrum do this. Synagogues.
That's great. And that
missionary churches.
I remember in the 90s when this first became a big issue, that was an area where people reached out. They reached out to churches. Yes. The church leaders would come together and talk about, okay, what can we do about this? And so that's a natural place to go. That's interesting you went there and asked, and you found great support there.
It was so overwhelming, and it's not just, it wasn't just financial support. It's what can we do? What else can we do? So it's that whole aspect of this project has been really overwhelming.
And so, before you go to break, I mean, what if a church says, "What can I do?" Or what if there's a church out there that didn't know about this but now wants to do something? Well,
and I want to say many of the churches, congregations are doing things. They are reaching out into the community and trying to reach young people. And I compliment them on that, because they're probably saving more lives than they know.
That is the front lines. We really need that kind of involvement. Those churches are right there in the community. And in some cases, people are moving away from churches, and that's sad, yeah. But they still hold a great deal of influence.
The services and what the things they offer really, you can't orchestrate a government to do that. Mm-hmm. Because they know their community, they know where some of the problems are. But just imagine if they had more resources to do that. Imagine if that were a very organized effort.
That's great. All right, why don't we go back to the phones here? Let's go to Wayne. Hello, Wayne.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Wayne.
I'm surprised to see you up so early in the morning.
Well, I love doing Morning Line. I really do. I love the callers. I love when people call in. Thank you, Wayne.
Well, it just shows you're a go-getter and you deserve an Academy Award.
An Academy Award, okay.
Okay. Yeah, I just woke up. I'm drinking a cup of coffee, so excuse me if I sound like I'm sleepy. But this subject, I'll make it quick. I grew up in the 60s, and I'm 64 years old. My mother and my father, they basically didn't shelter me, but they watched over me for 18 years. And my dad made it very clear. He said, I gave you 18 years and protected you. Now, when I get in my 50s, you're going to give me back 18 years. So I basically came back and took care of my dad for over 20 years. So I'm wondering how many children would be willing to do that. And I love my mother and father so much that when they told me to jump, I'd say, how high? There was no questions. And my dad said, for the first 13 years of your life, it's my rules, no exception. And I think today a lot of people are sitting back and just waiting for somebody to show or do it for them, and everything just slips through the cracks. And what we're seeing is results, because what I see on TV and what kids are doing, I would never ever do, and if I did, I would expect to be punished. And I'll say this one last thing. Kids today, I'm going to be real careful saying this because I don't want a kid to get an idea. They can go out and do things that adults do, and they don't get punished, and they basically, it's what I call revolving door. If I did the same thing that these kids did, I'd go to prison for a long time. And I think the kids are seeing that the criminal justice system is so relaxed that, you know, hey, I can get a reputation, and, you know, I'm saying the punishment needs to be so severe that the first time they do it, I hate to say this, but they need to be made an example of.
Do you think there need to be stricter consequences, stricter punishment? That's what you think the answer is to some of what we're seeing.
Well, I'll say it's quick. I talk a lot.
You said your coffee.
I grew up with Westerns. And every time I see a Western, I say, if we live in those days, everybody would be laying on Main Street. And I said, that's going from one extreme to the other extreme. But I'm saying, what we're doing today is kind of like what you see in the news, and I know when y'all report it, y'all shake your head and say, I can't believe they got away with it. And my dad said this, only in America can you become famous when you commit a crime and get caught, because you can do a TV documentary and write a book. And I said, that has to change. Because kids today, they're simply saying, you know, I can make a reputation, it don't cost nothing, and when I'm 18, it's all wiped off, expunged. See?
All right, Wayne, thank you, Wayne. That's an interesting thing. 18 years, parents took care of him, then he comes back, takes care of parents for 18 years. I think that's interesting. All right, so what Wayne is saying is something, I promise, we hear a lot. I feel like we've heard it a lot for a long time, that the punishments aren't strict enough. We have a whole other thing about there are just too many people in prison and prison reform. These are very difficult questions and that kind of thing. That's not what you're getting into. But when you hear somebody like Wayne passionately talk the way he does, I guess what's your reaction? What are your thoughts?
You know, I think we just live in such a different world, and unfortunately today's teenagers don't grow up on Westerns. You know, it's there's a lot of advantages to all the electronic information and availability we have, but you know, there's no gatekeeper on that. And so a lot of these kids, I mean, they've just, a typical kid has grown up on video games, and some of them are very violent, and we don't regulate that in any way. And they just have different information and different experiences in their heads. I'm not making excuses for kids. I'm just saying it's very different from the way it was when I grew up.
They're not growing up on Westerns. Yeah, you're right about that. And
I mean, because I do remember Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, and I'm dating myself, but and there was always a very clear good and evil. And today, all that's mixed. You have to sort it out yourself. And again, I'm not making excuses for teenagers. I just think they're growing up in a very challenging world, a very challenging environment. And most of them are trying to make sense of it. And some just are lost.
And they need the help of their parents, they need the help of their churches, they need our support. All right, we're going to take a break. If you want to call in, there's the number 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.